My name is Harold. Here in Bristol, everyone always called me Roland. I was born in Clifton, grew up in Clifton, worked 42 years in a car parts factory here in the neighborhood, and it was in this same city, on this same street, in this same house, with whitewashed walls and a backyard with an apple tree, that I raised my 3 children, Mark, Renee, and Edward. I gave what I had, and what I didn't have, I went after tooth and nail. I changed diapers, got up at dawn with children's fevers, lost sleep counting loose change to see if I could make ends meet without an empty fridge. I paid for all 3 of their university degrees. It wasn't easy. My back still complains today about the hours I spent bent over the production line, about the heat rising from the concrete floor, about the constant noise of the machines that left a ringing in my right ear that has never gone away since the 80s. But I don't regret it. I never regretted a single one of those days, because all of it had a purpose. It had a face. It had 3 faces that I knew since before they were born, that I learned to love in a way I can't explain with words, because it's a love greater than the entire English language can contain. The problem is that those faces grew up, they made their way in the world, they started their own families, which is fair, which is natural, which is exactly as it should be. But at some point along the way, without me realizing it, I was left behind. I became part of the scenery. I became that father who exists in the past, in the childhood stories they tell their own children, but who doesn't have much space in the busy schedule of those who still have their whole lives ahead of them. For months, I tried not to see it. I kept making excuses for them inside my own head, like a lawyer defending a client, even knowing they're wrong. Mark has young children. He's always busy with school and children's squabbles. Renee lives in London now. The routine there is different. The big city eats you alive and spits out your bones on the tube. Edward works too much. The lad doesn't stop even on weekends. There's always a project, a meeting, a new urgency. I understood everything. I justified everything. But deep down in that quiet, honest place hidden in the middle of my chest, I knew the truth I didn't want to face. And the truth hurt more than anything I had ever felt. More than the hot days in the factory, more than the back pain, even more than the loss of my Zelda, who left too soon and left me with this big house and this silence that only grew with the years. The ritual was always the same. In the afternoon, when the sun began to set and the backyard was bathed in a golden light that looked beautiful from the outside but felt heavy within, I would pick up the phone and dial one of their numbers. Sometimes Mark, sometimes Renee, sometimes Edward. The voicemail almost always answered, and I would leave a message in that father's voice that tries not to sound needy, but which is transparent as glass, that any child who truly knew me would know how much the forced serenity of those words cost. "Hi, son, it's Dad. Just called to see how you are. Call me back when you can, all right?" Then I would place the phone on the table and wait. An hour, 2, a whole day, sometimes 2 days, sometimes a whole week. Nothing. At Christmas, a short message would arrive on WhatsApp. "Merry Christmas, Dad." Sometimes with a little green tree emoji, sometimes with nothing but the bare words. And I would stare at those letters on the screen like someone trying to find warmth in a campfire that died out long ago. I know I was a flawed father. Every father is, and every father who says he didn't make mistakes is lying to himself. I worked too much when they were little. I missed out on some things that shouldn't have been without me. I missed school plays because my shift wouldn't allow it. I arrived late to more than one birthday party with that tired face that children notice before any adult. I was harsh when I should have been kinder, and I was silent when they needed me to speak. But I was present. I didn't abandon them. I loved in the way I learned to love, which was my father's way, which was the way of men of my generation, more of action than of words, more of silent effort than of long hugs. But it was love, yes, always was, and still is. What I couldn't accept was the feeling that this love had an expiration date, that I had served the purpose of fatherhood and was now relegated to a corner, like that old armchair that no one has the heart to throw out, but no one uses or even looks at properly anymore. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, with the ceiling fan spinning slowly and the silence of the house weighing like a concrete slab on my shoulders, that I stopped and asked myself a question I had never had the courage to properly formulate, not even inside my own head. If I needed to keep reminding my children that I existed, had I already been forgotten long ago, and the only one who didn't know that truth yet was me? That thought pierced me from my chest to the nape of my neck like a cold wind with no origin on a warm afternoon. I stood still in the middle of the living room with the phone in my hand and didn't call anyone. For the first time in months, I didn't leave any message. I stayed quiet, and the silence, for the first time in a long time, wasn't theirs. It was mine, and it was different. There I began to understand something that my grandfather Benedict, a man of few words but great wisdom, once taught me when I was a boy, and cried because I couldn't catch a butterfly in the backyard back in Clifton. He said, with the calm of someone who had lived long enough not to need haste, "Roland, if you run after the butterfly, it will always flee. But if you build a beautiful garden, it will come to you of its own accord. And if it doesn't come, at least you'll have a garden." At the time I was 8 years old and only half understood. At 84, I finally understood what he meant with every syllable of that. Begging for attention isn't receiving love. I had spent months stuck in a cycle that diminished me with every turn. Every unanswered message I left on voicemail chipped away at my dignity. Every Christmas message received with indifference shrank something inside me that I urgently needed to stop shrinking. And I, who faced 42 years in a factory without bending my back, who supported this house alone after Zelda left, was bending before an absence that I myself was feeding with my anxious insistence. That night, lying in bed with the ceiling staring back at me and the city of Bristol making its noise outside, I made peace with the past. I revisited the mistakes, acknowledged what needed to be acknowledged, and then, with the clear conscience of someone who had fulfilled what they had to, decided that I would no longer carry that burden. The invisible contract of fatherhood, to nurture, protect, educate, that contract I honored with everything I had, not with perfection, but with real presence. And if my children carried old grievances, that was baggage that belonged to them. I had already carried enough weight in this life. Now, the most difficult thing remained, to stop waiting at the window like someone waiting for rain in a dry desert. It was time to build the garden. I didn't know exactly how to do it yet, but for the first time in a long time, I felt that the answer was within me, and not on the other side of a phone line that never rang when I needed to hear it. Building a garden. Simple to say, difficult to start when you are 84 years old, have 2 knees that protest when climbing stairs, and a routine that for 5 years revolved around an armchair, a fan, and a phone that didn't ring. But Grandpa Benedict was right. He always was. And I learned early on that truly old people, those who carry experience like a tool, don't throw words to the wind by chance. The first step was the most painful, and not because it required physical effort. It was painful because it required me to look at myself in the mirror without sparing myself. I needed to kill the guilt that lived inside me like an uninvited guest who stayed, occupying space, eating what was in the fridge, sleeping in the best bed. I needed to forgive myself. Not a fake forgiveness, not that shallow forgiveness we tell ourselves just to feel good for a day. A true forgiveness, one that goes deep and acknowledges mistakes without denying any, but also recognizes the effort, the years, the love that existed even in the imperfect forms it took. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. I had done my part. That was the conclusion I reached that night, lying in the dark. And when morning came, I woke up different, not suddenly lighter, because life doesn't work that way, but with a newfound resolve that I hadn't felt in a long time. The change began with a poster tacked to the neighborhood pharmacy's bulletin board, one of those modest posters that no one really notices. Woodworking workshop for adults, meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I stood looking at that paper with slightly crooked handwriting and felt something I couldn't immediately name. Only on the walk back home did I realize it was curiosity. A simple, clean curiosity with no expectations behind it. I went the following Tuesday. The workshop was in a small shed at the back of a man's house named Leo, who was about 20 years younger than me, but had worked with wood since he was 15 and knew every type of grain, every vein, every secret of that material as intimately as one knows their own family. He received me without ceremony, gave me an apron, placed me in front of a piece of oak, and said, "Here there's only one rule. Respect the wood, and it will respect you back." I can't explain what happened in the first few weeks at the workshop. Something was reorganizing itself within me as I worked with my hands, as I sanded a rough surface until it was smooth and soft, as the smell of freshly cut wood began occupying a space that silence had taken. The hands that had spent decades tightening screws on an assembly line found a new purpose, and the hours, which before passed slowly and heavily like stone, began to have a different consistency, firmer, fuller. In the same weeks, I started going to the neighborhood park on Saturday mornings, where a group of retirees gathered to play chess under the trees. I joined the circle humbly, because chess was never my strong suit, and I was beaten by people much younger than me many times. But I laughed. And old Arthur, a man from Bath who came to the capital in his youth and never returned, became my board and conversation partner. He had stories that were worth more than anything I could watch on a screen, and he listened to mine in the same way. I also rediscovered the kitchen. For many years after Zelda left, I cooked out of obligation, a sad thing for survival without any pleasure, but there was a recipe my mother taught me when I was still a boy, a rich fish stew with palm oil and fresh cilantro that she made on winter Sundays, and that filled the house with a smell that still tugs at my heart when I remember it. I started making it again. I'd make a big pot, even if I was the only one eating. Sometimes I'd take a portion to old Arthur and to Leo at the workshop. Food began to be what it always was, an act of love and not just necessity. Gradually, without me planning it, something inside me began to shift on its axis. I stopped being the man who waited and became the man who lived. The difference seems small when stated like that, but it's enormous when you feel it deep down. The emptiness in the middle of my chest every late afternoon was slowly being filled by other things, by real conversations, by genuine laughter, by small daily conquests, like the drawer that fit perfectly after 3 tries, like the chess game I almost won from Arthur on a cold July morning. And then something happened that I didn't expect, or rather that I had expected but had stopped expecting, which is different. When the insistent calls ceased, when the anxious messages stopped arriving every week, when my silence changed its nature and ceased to be a cry for help, becoming a space of autonomy, my children began to feel a different kind of absence. Not their absence in me, but my absence in them. Mark called on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the workshop, my hands dirty with sanding dust and my mind on the table I was building, and I almost didn't answer, but I did. And when he heard my firm, busy voice with the background noise of the workshop, he asked, "Dad, are you okay? What's that noise?" And I, without drama, without resentment, told him about the workshop, about the oak, about Leo and his rules of respecting the wood. Mark was silent for a second, and then he said, "That's cool, Dad. I swear I didn't know you did that." Renee called 2 weeks later, Edward the following month. The conversations changed tone. They were no longer sustained by guilt, no longer that awkwardness of a child calling because they know they should have called sooner. They were conversations of genuine interest. They asked about the table, about chess, about the fish stew, and I told them. I didn't hold anything back. I didn't demand anything. I didn't make it a burden. I just told them. I also learned along this path that the garden doesn't always attract all the butterflies. There is a real possibility which needs to be accepted that even after rebuilding one's own life, some children may remain distant for reasons that lie with them, not with me. And I learned that this also needs to be embraced, not with resentment, not with bitterness, but with the serenity of someone who did what they could and cannot force what does not want to come. I cannot force anyone to love me, but I can, with absolute certainty, refuse to let someone's absence destroy my self-esteem and my joy of being alive. Today the phone can go for days without ringing, and I am no longer standing in the armchair waiting for the screen to light up. I'm in the workshop working on a new piece, or in the park getting beaten by Arthur at chess with a laugh on my face, or in the kitchen with the palm oil heating in the pan and the freshly chopped cilantro on the board. I am living. If my children want to be part of this, the door is unlocked, as it always has been. But I no longer stand motionless in the doorway, waiting for footsteps in the hall. At 84 years old, Harold Rowland understands that his identity is not defined by who visits on Sundays, nor by the frequency of phone messages. It is defined by the man he faces in the mirror every morning. A man who worked hard, loved deeply, erred as any human being errs, but who today chooses to live with dignity. The silence may continue to be loud outside, but within me, finally, there is peace.